And now for a quick overview of today's meeting, which will last about 30 minutes. First, I would like to take a moment to go over a couple of housekeeping items, as well as provide a brief company overview. And then I will turn it over to John to get into our main presentation, which will last about 30 minutes. And then we will take a minute to go over upcoming educational events, and then we will wrap up with a 10-minute question and answer session. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so through the question panel at the bottom of the GoToWebinar console window located on the right side of your screen. Please note that all questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. So if you would like to minimize your GoToWebinar console window during the presentation, just click the right-facing arrow key on the top left of the console. Clicking the left arrow key will return the console so that you can input your questions. And now I'd like to give you a brief overview of GSI. GSI is a full-service J.D. Edwards consulting organization. We are also an Oracle Platinum partner that was founded in 2004 and now has over 100 employees. And we have offices nationwide and are recognized on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest-growing companies in the U.S. And we specialize in project consulting, managed services, cloud and hosting services, with all of our services backed with a 100% guarantee. And we also provide a broad spectrum of business, functional, and technical consulting services for Oracle NetSuite, Oracle Cloud, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and other enterprise applications. And in addition, we are a product development company that has many popular products, including Genius, which is our advanced monitoring and performance analytics solution for J.D. Edwards or any business critical system on any platform. Genesis, which is our load and stress testing application for system design, validation, or expansion for J.D. Edwards or any web-based business critical system. G Shield, which is our comprehensive security solution for J.D. Edwards, including password reset and two-factor authentication. Rapid Reconciler, which allows you to effectively manage your inventory, in-transit, and R&V reconciliation processes for any version of E1 or World. And Rapid Approval, which is a Salesforce App Exchange solution that streamlines the approval request process. All right, thank you guys so much for your time. I would like to now turn things over to John for our main presentation.
Great, thank you. Let's share my screen.
Perfect, I can see it.
All right, let's start. All right, thanks everybody. Today's webcast is one of our shorter webcasts, but a very critical to your thought process of using Enterprise One and what you do moving forward. When we first learned that Oracle modified Enterprise One with the beginning, I can't remember, it was a flavor of 9.2 tools release. It wasn't the very first release, but shortly thereafter, they allowed you to start storing deployment server files or spec object files, print queue objects, and media objects in the database. It seemed like a really awesome idea. Okay, let's pick up these things that are file-based systems and we'll just move them into the database, store them there. Everything's great. You don't have file systems to work with, but then the question is, people started, thinking about it, whether or not you should do it, and in some cases, in many cases, it doesn't necessarily make sense. So although Oracle delivered the software and said, hey, best practice, move things in the database. Well, what if you have 10 terabytes of media objects and it takes you 4 months to migrate those objects to the database? Is that a great idea? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. So I wanted to address some of the pros and cons, and that's why we put together this webcast, just to give you a touch of background. The spec objects are effectively deployment server files, the C files, etc., business functions, business view, and they're physical files stored on the deployment server file system. So there's a one-time process to migrate those objects to the database, and honestly, there really is no choice. When you take a tools release that has this, you're going to have to migrate your objects to the database. So not a whole lot of decision making there. Oracle is just going to start start storing things there. So, and again, the comment here at the bottom, the Enterprise One system it'll look at the database whenever a file-based object is used. And I'll talk a little more about the pros and cons of file systems. So to do this, there's a couple of new tables. They also added not only the ability to store them into the database, but they also added new functionality, and basically that's the repository history. So any object, file-based object, now can have like a somewhat like version control. You can see when an object has been updated, when it's been promoted from one path code to another. You can compare. I call it versions for C files to a certain extent, not to be confused with interactive versions or batch versions, just versions of code. And it does it with the F98, 780R, and 790H for the history. And those tables are maintained in Object Library, and so every time you make a change, the history table gets incremented as well. And this architecture is very, very similar to the, it involves the UDOs, so your user-defined object format is in place. So there's also a standalone UBE in Oracle, R98 780R, which inserts the remainder of the objects without files into the database. This is an optional program, and honestly, I would advise you not to use this program if at all possible. You could end up stuffing all objects sitting out on the deployment server, whether they're file-based or not, and end up with taking days to get the process loaded, and then you end up with stuff you don't even really want there. So I would just use the package build process. That's my advice. Our CNC team, we have over 30 CNC folks, have not had issues with it. So my advice is to use the package build process, and then there's a flag that lets the system know you can still do this multi-foundation. You can do it for DB and PY while you're testing the tools release, and then worry about production at go live time. So unlike the deployment server files, media objects in the database is a little bit different. You have the option of moving them or not, but it is an all or nothing thing. You either move all of your media objects to the database or none at all. So that's part of the consideration. And of course, there's a UBE to move. There's a UBE R98 MODAT to move them. There were some bugs in some of the earlier tools releases. 921, the UBE could not be run on the I series or back client. That's fixed now. So my guess is you won't be taking any of those older tools releases. But if you're still on it, 921, and you're on I series and you haven't migrated yet, you might want to hold off doing this process since it's just not going to run at all anyway. So the third option has to deal with batch output, and that's for your print jobs, your CSVs, your PDFs, and effectively the F98 767 is unchanged. The default printer application has changed a little bit, and there's some additional columns for output location. The F98 7 or 6110R is a new table that holds the batch output table. So again, we haven't really talked about volume of data required. So this is the first mention of the amount of space something like this might take up. Your SY920 will need to be bigger, roughly 2 gigabytes bigger. And of course that depends basically on the volume, and you should keep a very close eye on your particular SY920 database. So there'll be some new columns created. 2 gig might be small. So I know one place that produced 100 gig a day. So that can be a problem for some place like that. So again, the preferred choice is to store your print queue objects into the database. It's going to allow for scalable batch queues in the future, improving handling of larger volumes of batch jobs, And again, there's a UBE to move the objects, but you don't have to do all or nothing with print queue. You can pick different print queues, using the OCM type mappings, filtering by user, filtering by report. Perhaps you don't want payroll data, let's say, to go into the database. Maybe you want it to go to the file system, or vice versa. So what are some of the pros and cons of moving all of these different objects? And this is why you came here. The first part was just a description. You can move your deployment server files, you can move your media objects, and you can move your batch output. So some of these objects, these pros actually apply to just one of the objects. Some of it is all, like preparing for remote package builds or mobile package builds in the future. That's one of the reasons. If you store files in the database, it'll make it really easy. A lot of CNC folks, they have to work crazy hours sometimes. On numerous occasions, I've been out to dinner on a Friday night with the family, and I get a phone call saying, hey, I need a package build. I'm like, okay, I'll have to finish up my dinner here, and I'll get right home and get on it. Well, it'd be nice if you could just kick off the build from your phone. And just, instead just say, hold on, folks, I need 3 or 4 minutes here to kick off the process, and then we can continue. You could just kick it off from your phone, and part of that, moving to the objects to the database will allow that. Again, it's a nice benefit to have multiple versions of same objects, and sometimes you can choose at runtime, although I haven't seen anybody actually do that. For the deployment server, it's moving things to the database. It's a building block to the future. I've been discussing using virtual queues, batch queues for a long time. Right now, if you have an enterprise server and has a single-threaded job queue, if you want to have a second enterprise server that also has that single-threaded, you actually don't have a single-threaded queue because each server can handle that queue twice. So you have to be careful with any kind of clustering type of event. But if you had a virtual queue, it wouldn't matter what server it runs on. So managing file system databases is complicated for some customers. If you already have a DBA on staff and dealing with backups, it can be a lot easier to just move files around inside, or move databases around, and not have to worry about file system backups. I know the next one, transporting data files from on-premise to the cloud. Yeah, because like GSI's had to do that several times. We've done that dozens of times, where we take an on-premise and go to the cloud, or cloud to cloud, and you stand up the new system, and you have to worry about replicating the database, and you have to also worry about replicating the file systems. You're continuing to use the system, create new PDFs, new media objects, etc. But if it's just sitting in the database, you only have to worry about one replication technology, not two. Eliminating folder shares is huge. We've had, in the last few years, we've had 2 of our clients that were down for almost a week because they had some open shares on their deployment server. They got hacked, and it brought down, and those 2 places actually happened to be Windows SQL, so those shares over there also got hacked, and they were in trouble. So getting rid of shares is definitely a pro. Any file information is now more secure. That was more of a coding change. Also, if you get the media object and C files off of the deployment server, it's no longer a server required for DR. You don't have to worry about a deployment server being up and running if you had a crisis. Let's see, continuing on the pros, backups for all data are done with a database tool. It makes it a little bit, can make it easier to meet, RPO and RTO for DR purposes. For Oracle, media objects can be stored on slower storage than the OLTP. In Microsoft SQL Server, you can assign the media objects to different file group that goes on slower storage. For the most part, one of the cons that we'll talk about, so I'll talk about storage now. When you store files on the deployment server, usually it's physical disk, it's spinning disk, it's low cost. Database services often are in the most expensive type of storage that you could have. So if you've got terabytes of data that you need to, you have to keep, keep for a period of time. If it's still, but not accessed very frequently, then the slower disk storage is much lower cost than the expensive flash storage that you might have your database on. We had a client that's looking to go live on the new tools release, and they have 1 terabyte of media objects. How long is that going to take to copy up onto the system? Is that all going to be stored in expensive flash storage? It's a very big consideration for you. Is how long is it going to take to get that data up there? 1 terabyte of media objects, I guarantee you, is not going to be done in a 3 or 4 hour window. So if you're looking to do an upgrade and migrate your objects at the same time, and you have terabytes of media objects and print queue objects, I guarantee that's not going to get done on that weekend. It'll have to be a separate process, and you might have to split that into multiple weekends. So few things: data can be compressed and reducing the file storage. Okay, that's helpful. If it's expensive storage, at least you can compress it. Can also increase performance. In some cases, although GSI's experience has not been a performance gain at any one of these layers, not at the deployment server package build process, not for media objects, and not for print queue objects. We have not seen much difference in performance, nothing noticeable at least. So if you're thinking, yeah, I'm gonna get retrieval of my media objects much faster, think again. It could happen if you have very slow spinning disk now and you have an ultra fast database. You might see some performance gains. Databases have really good HADR availability and capability. Oracle database has many options with DataGuard, Golden Gate, etc. SQL Server as well, versus file systems that maybe you have to buy a third-party tool like what's one of those that we've seen used. But anyway, there's ways to Zerto is what I was thinking of. That could be a complex implementation as well. Higher security database does have really good security. There's database auditing capabilities, advanced features like flashback, all things that can help you retrieve your data and back up your data or migrate your data much faster. So if you're thinking to do this in preparation to moving to a cloud environment from local, it might be worth thinking about. And the bottom one is in my opinion, one of the biggest ones, the biggest pro, and that is all of your data and objects are managed in one place. Instead of having to worry about media objects on the deployment server or another share, print queue objects sitting on a enterprise server or some network share, it just puts it all in the database, and that does make it simpler to manage. Yeah, now let's talk about the cons, and this is probably some of the reason why you joined today. Database is much higher. In recent years, we've been finding that moving databases to solid state storage has improved performance dramatically, and many people are putting their entire database in SSD. Steered storage is often desirable, especially at hosting companies. Databases will become much larger. Correct. If you've got 10 terabytes of media objects, I guess at the very least, you can expect to have 10 terabytes of data in the database, unless it's compression. Now, PDFs are compressed pretty tightly, so if your big volume is print queue objects that are PDFs, you're not going to see any storage compression advantages there at all. PDFs are already compressed. Indexing and fragmentation may require table partitioning. So yeah, now you need your DBA to be keeping track of something that you used to just manage in a file system. This next one is definitely a showstopper in many cases. Time that it takes to migrate data into a database. If you're faced with terabytes of media objects, you're going to have to test, and it could very well be that you can't get that done in an outage in a window. You might have to wait till a holiday or something like that, or maybe you just need to keep it where it is and not even think about it. Better purging cadence is required. You should have had that all along anyway, but it kind of forces you now, especially with all of the other pros. The database can grow, just as file system can grow. So if you have some custom development that is, trying to retrieve files from the file system, it can be a problem. So if you have media objects and it's an all or nothing thing, and you have an integration that reads the media object itself, you're going to have a developer come in and try to write something that can extract an object out of a database. Some programs like CreateForm already have, don't really matter. They'll work either way, but it's something for you to check if you have integrations retrieving that. Sometimes the business driver can be hard for you to justify, especially with all of the other pros. I got this here, but it's wrong. Third-party programs require physical files such as CreateForm. CreateForm is, I forgot to remove that. That is not true. I've been corrected on this one, but it's something to think about. Tools release to migrate, requires thinking, because you're going to have to, apply a tools release, which requires testing in the business as well. So some of the other cons, difficulty with moving with the database. The reason I brought this up is because our team has had problems more with the media objects than with print queue objects and deployment server. The deployment server seems to go just fine. Media objects, for some reason, we've had multiple restarts, just issues with the UBs in the early days. They were a little flaky, especially around the I-series as well. So yeah, Oracle is giving you a lot of really, really great tools for migrating to the database. It may be of value to you. You might want to start with just the deployment server files and see if that's of value to you. Maybe allow you to eliminate a share on the deployment server. Maybe you don't have very many media objects. Go ahead and do it. Perhaps your print queue, you have some things that people need access to physical files. The good news is with printer output, you can do it. It's not an all or nothing thing. You can map some printer output to the database, but others you can remain local through mappings. So I said it would be a short session, but an important session. I hope that I've given you some ideas and some things to think about. The number one thing to think of is amount of storage. How much data do you have? Go look at your deployment server media or wherever you have your media objects. See what the size of the folder is. Look at your print queue objects, see what size it is, and that will at least give you a baseline of how much space in the database you may need. You will need additional database space, approximately 2 gig per path code for the deployment server files. So with that, Brooke, I did say it would be a half hour. We're almost at that point. So
great.
I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much, John. That was great. I just want to cover a few follow-up items, and then we'll move into our question and answer section of our webcast. Today's webcast is part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series on J.D. Edwards. And our upcoming webcasts are currently listed on the screen, but we do update them weekly. So please feel free to visit us at getgsi.com/webcast for our most up-to-date schedule. And also, we will be at Collaborate 2019 in San Antonio, Texas, which is April 7th through the 11th, and our booth number is 445. Be sure to come visit us, and it will be a great week of education and networking with your J.D. Edwards peers. And GSI provides extensive free educational resources for the J.D. Edwards community, including our weekly educational webcasts, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, our online resource center where you can access on-demand webcasts, white papers, and so much more. And we also do on-site and virtual workshops. Now, if you'd like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts or our monthly newsletter, or to create an account, go to our resource center at getgsi.com, click on Platforms on the main menu, and then you can select J.D. Edwards on the left-hand side. All right, John, it looks like we have a few questions here. Our first question today is from Daniel, and he said, we have an external net web app that we use to access attachments. How can we access these objects after objects get moved to the database?
That's a real a good question. The answer is you'd have to write a program that extracts the data from it, and this is a very good reason of why you would not want to migrate your media objects to the database because you have third parties that are trying to retrieve them. So unless that third-party integrator has the ability to work with Oracle to figure out how to extract from the database, and there are business functions to do that. So unless they modify their code, until that point, you really can't.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. And then we have another one, another question from Ross, and he said, "Are virtual queues available today?"
Yeah, great question. Don't I wish? No. I've been addressing this with Oracle. I still worked for JD Edwards when I've been asking, since I started asking for this. About 5 years ago, one of their developers, Gurvinder Bali, suggested that GSI write our own code to support virtual queues, and I'm like, it's too deeply embedded in JD Edwards for us to do that. I bug up our contacts all the time. In fact, if you send me an email, I would actually appreciate if you would send me an email if you want virtual queues, and I'm creating a list of people to send to Oracle development to get this a higher priority. The minute we have virtual queues, it's the minute you can start doing active-active clustering with enterprise servers. So I'm hoping it's sooner rather than later, but I don't have a time frame from Oracle. They keep telling me that, yes, it is in their roadmap to produce virtual queues, and some of this with the media objects or with the objects in the database is a precursor to that.
Okay, great. And I'll be sure to send you his email and information afterwards, John.
Okay.
And our next question is from Alan. And he said, "As I understand it, there is no business function to retrieve media objects from the database. I was told there is an API, but no business function that uses the API. How do you retrieve media objects from the database using UBE?" And then...
It's way beyond my personal capability, Brooke. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not a developer. I thought there was a business function, but I wouldn't know an API from a business function, honestly. I know the two different words, but we'll ask that, we'll ask that question. I will get back to you. I'll send that to Oracle development to see what they say about how to do it. It is a problem. I thought there was a business function, but I guess I'm wrong on that. Because, I mean, obviously, when you're using Enterprise 1, the software code itself has the ability to peel objects out of the database and display them. Like when you're on a development workstation, you can add a C file and it extracts it locally. The way the process works is it puts multiple objects into a PAR file and then loads the PAR files and stores them as blobs in the database. So they are stored as blobs, but you need some way to read those blobs. I thought there was a business function because of all of the different JD Edwards applications that retrieve it. So we'll follow up with you on that.
Okay, great. All right, great. Thank you so much, John. We'll be sure to reach out to everybody that we said we would. And that appears to be the end of our questions for today. John, thank you so much for your presentation, and everybody for your questions today. We enjoyed having you. And then also, as a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit, and you will be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast as well as a copy of the presentation. And then after today's webcast, we will do the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card. To anyone that attended the entire webcast will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. And if you have any follow-up questions for John or myself, we will be sure to get back with you, and our contact info is currently listed on the screen. And again, we want to thank you so much for attending our webcast today, and we hope that you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, John.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thanks.